Thanks, Joe. I know I briefly referred to you as Jim there, so apologies on that. And Joe, two quick things just as you finish up. The important point you make about time is of the essence here, is really well made in terms of number of deaths already this year, drug-related deaths. And secondly, I think your circle of influence is a really great segue into our next speaker, who's Dr. Orlaigh Quinn, who's just very recently retired from the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, but a long career, over 40 years, working at a very senior level across many departments in civil and public service. And we've asked Orlaigh to come along because I know there was a lot of questions and deliberations at a previous assembly about, what's the best governance structure to get things done at government level, and Orlaigh has all of that experience in spades. So thanks for coming along, Orlaigh.
Thanks, Paul, and good morning, everybody. And look, I'm delighted to be here. I don't have slides, so I'll just give you a few what I would see as perhaps useful comments for your work. I'm not totally familiar with drugs policy, but certainly in my previous career I headed up the National Office for Social Inclusion. I've worked on various policies across government, 8 government departments, and most recently, as Paul said, I was Secretary General of the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. In that role, I worked with 5 senior ministers. I've also worked with 4 Taoiseach, and I have sat on every cabinet committee that exists and did exist. So let me talk a little bit about how things get done. In Ireland, we have a very crowded landscape, it has to be said, of departments, interest groups, agencies, and there's no single model that's perfect. So saying that NGOs are good, government is bad, ain't going to work. Saying that it can only be run out of the state services and not out of the NGOs won't work either, because we have a very mixed system. You don't have a blank page to start. You must start with the current system and then say, what can we do better? So I want to reflect a little bit, perhaps from my experience, and obviously you yourselves are deliberating over this for many months and have thoughts. But from my experience is to look at what would work better, what doesn't work, and what you might want to think about. So we have a political system, a representative democracy, and we have cabinet committees. We have a joint Oireachtas committees, and all of those matter. Politics matters because ultimately that's where decisions get made in this country and that's where money gets allocated. So when you look about wanting more resources, how are those resources going to be allocated? And that's through the budgetary process, but more importantly, we talk a lot about the budget, and even Jim had how much he got in the budget in the last few years. The budget is about between 5–6 billion, which is a lot. But the government spends 120 billion. So you need to look at what's already being spent and can that be reshaped? Can that be moved? We set up programmes that last a very long time. We don't put sunset clauses on them or review clauses. Can we close down things to start new things? The other comment I would make is, how do you get your item onto an agenda? How does it become important? And again, can I say politicians are probably the closest people to the individuals in their communities because they need their votes. And individuals matter. So if you look at a government minister, and if I look at, say, for example, when I worked with Leo Varadkar, he had 4 jobs. He's a TD, he has to be re-elected. He's a government minister, and within the department, when I worked with him, we have 14 offices and agencies, so all of that work has to be managed. He's the leader of his party, and he's also the Taoiseach and soon-to-be Taoiseach. How do you get something on that man's agenda that's important? You have to build a really strong vision and a really strong proposal that's going to get there. It has to be in the programme for government. It has to work so that when it comes to a cabinet committee, it matters. When we did the action plan for jobs, at a time when Ireland lost 300,000 jobs over 3 years in 2011-2012, we had to say, what are the important things? what's going to matter. I have sat at tables, can I say, where there's a whole list of 200 items, all of which are worthy, can I say, and I have seen people's eyes glaze over because you're going through lists and lists and lists of actions. So I would have said for yourselves, very important to think about the big items, the priority. What are the 6 or 7 big things that are going to matter? I have no doubt in your deliberations, every single group that has come into you has put forward their proposal, their idea, what they think will work. And your job is to try and sift that. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that none of them are worthy, but they have to be important and they have to have impact. And you have to be able to say afterwards, as a result of that action, this happened, we measured it, and it worked. So impact, research is important, but can I say you can get bogged down in research and data as well? When I did a study at one stage on people with disabilities, there was 400 pieces of research that were done. Now, Jim mentioned he has 15 staff. You cannot possibly deal with the amount of stuff that's coming through. So again, you need to be selective. You need to ensure who's doing the research, what is their angle, where are they coming from. So you're trying to balance all of those factors. When we talk about NGOs good, NGOs all fight also amongst themselves because they're all after the same scarce resources. And quite often you will find, and agencies as well, state agencies, you will find they're all in the same area, they're doing the same research, they're doing the same slightly different angles. So very important to have 1 or 2 single sources of truth that you can rely on, that use all the research that's done, it's very important. But again, can I say to you, if you're a minister dealing with 100 different items on his desk or her desk, there's a limit to how much you can take in. So what I would say is try and be concise, try and be real in what's possible. And really, I suppose, what I would say is pick what you are most important. In the housing plan, for example, the current housing plan, I think there's over 200 actions. So again, at a very senior level, we pulled out 12. We said, if we can do these 12, these are really going to have impact. We're going to measure them, we're going to monitor them. Monitoring is very important. So again, you need to get it on an agenda that every quarter or every 6 months, people have to account for their actions. They have to say why it was delivered, or more importantly, why it wasn't. If it wasn't, what's going to be done to change it? Things happen all the time that change the agenda. Look at what we went through in COVID, for example. That was on nobody's agenda. When I took up my role, Brexit didn't exist. And suddenly we're dealing with a completely different world than what we started with. So I would say to you all, please keep that in mind. Sometimes it can be disappointing. You think your item is the most important and it should be done tomorrow. It is important, but it has to take its place with everything else. And that's just something, as I say, that manages and policy. One area I just wanted to comment, because sometimes there's always a comment, let's set up a new agency. The new agency will sort it all out. The new agency doesn't sit at Cabinet Committee, usually. It doesn't sit at the centre of power. So I would just say, be careful. Is there an agency that already exists that can be adapted? A new agency, and I've been involved in both closing agencies and setting up agencies, will take 2 to 3 years. That's just the reality. By the time you get the staff, the skills. So again, I would just say to you, think about that in terms of
just 2 minutes.
Using what's there.
Thank you.
2 minutes. Grant. So let me say then just what I would say to you, what I think in my experience works. So first of all, the powerful vision. Your item is so important, it matters. You have to set that very clearly to make sure that people understand it. And after that then, you need to look at where it best lands and how to get it done. Small number of items, measurable, resources allocated, people accountable. So all of that laid out very clearly. I looked at the programme for government because it has to be in the programme for government, that's important. I looked at it from the drugs perspective and the actions that are there. I would be very clear in avoiding things like examine options. That just sets up a whole new stream of work. Possible approaches, look at this, you're setting up more work and more work. As I say, try and be a little bit small set definitive. Whose leads, who's going to be involved? This is cross-government. There is no one government department or agency can carry this. So you need to make sure the right people at the right level are in the room, and the people who have responsibility and accountability. Timeline, how you're monitoring it, the regularity of the timing, centralised approach to research, resources required across what's already there, as well as new funding. And maybe, Paul, I'll pause there. Very happy to take questions. I'm giving you a very, as I say, heads up from my expression of what works. But ultimately, I would say to you all, it's not going to be one solution, because it can't be with the mixed model that we have. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Perfect,